And I think we're recording as well, so we're all set and ready to go. Great. So I hope everyone had a good break. You still have a couple more days of break, so I appreciate you making time to meet with me today. This is sort of the customary meeting that we do in early January just to kind of take stock of where we are, to establish a timeline, to give you sort of bite-sized pieces of what you need to do next, because I think the process can get really overwhelming if you don't take it in bite-sized bits. So that's part of what we're up to. It's also where I take the opportunity to talk to you a little bit about traveling during the time of COVID, which is sort of an informed traveler check-in piece. In fact, I can just move to the next slide here to give you a sense of the things that we're going to talk about. So I wanted to go over some of these things. If at any point you have questions, feel welcome to just unmute and start asking. I can see the chat feature here too as I'm moving through. So if you drop questions there, I can probably field them as well. But really, this is an opportunity for you to really feel comfortable about your next steps. So do feel welcome to ask questions as you think of them. So having said all that, I'm going to move us up to the next slide and just give you kind of the overview of what else is coming. This is not an orientation that is meant to give you all the information at once. As I mentioned, this is supposed to be kind of bite-sized pieces. And really what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what you need to know kind of as you need to know it. But obviously, if you get impatient and want to know more, just let me know. But to that end, we have those health and safety orientations that theoretically you've viewed online already. But that's sort of another area or another kind of package of details that you can be aware of. There will be a pre-departure orientation later on in the semester, usually in mid-May or so, or I'm sorry, mid-April, to go over things like packing and credit evaluation and, those sorts of details. This one today is to go over things like what you need to be preparing for the partner applications, some of those COVID matters that I mentioned, and other such things. So that's kind of how the information has been organized and planned out. So as I said, if you have questions or are just impatient and want to know more, just let me know. But to get us kind of started with the COVID picture here and traveling during an epidemic. So the basic thing that I can tell you is that everything is always changing all the time. So one of the things that we are really trying to tease out and to make sure is very plain for students is that a lot of things are going to be changing and ever shifting. So OSU stance on travel during the pandemic, our partner institutions stance on it. And really, it's this middle bullet point here where you're going to be working with a lot of entities outside of my office and outside of OSU. And they're all out of all of our control, right? So really, I think leaning in on your flexibility, your willingness to tolerate ambiguity, your willingness to just kind of roll with things is going to serve you very well in the next couple of months. It is also really, I think, important to kind of bookmark some of these resources that I'm going to be giving you, because as things change and frequently without warning, I am going to be relying on you as well to be informed about, current requirements for entry and exit into Japan or out of the United States or vice versa. So those are the sorts of things that I really wanted to tease out. And then as far as expectations are concerned, when you travel, hopefully, to Japan, it is going to be one of the general expectations, both of OSU and of the partner institution, that you're going to follow those local regulations, So whether that's masking or social distancing or proof of vaccination or negative COVID test requirements, whatever it is. And I think that in lots of parts of East Asia, you can really expect this to be a lot more strict than it is perhaps in the US. So those local regulations will be explained to you by partner institutions, but it will be incumbent on you to follow them as carefully as possible. Um, to stay home if you're sick. Obviously, we want you doing that here at OSU too. But then, keeping an eye on those quarantine requirements, the testing requirements, if you start feeling sick, how you need to report that. I'm sure your host institution will have lots to say about this and lots of instructions to give you. And then, of course, as I was just mentioning here, those requirements for entry and exit into or out of Japan, out of the United States. These are all very much in flux too and frequently changing. So what I can tell you right now is that, and you probably know this already, right now Japan is not approving any student visas. They're not issuing student visas. They're not letting people in. Obviously, we are hoping that this is going to change, and both the host institutions and my office are moving forward with a certain amount of cautious optimism. So we will proceed with our applications to the partner, as we'll talk about here in a little bit. And we are going to start moving in that direction. But you should know, just right out of the gates, right now, as it stands, if you had to leave tomorrow, it would not be viable as a program, just simply because Japan is not issuing those visas. So again, we hope that is going to change, but that's where we are right now. And as a result, and their border has been closed for most of this time. So unlike these sorts of meetings that I've done for other destinations, I don't have a ton of information about those local guidelines, just simply because it hasn't been available, right? Our students haven't gone there. So whereas I can talk to you at length about what requirements are and expectations are in, say, South Korea, where we do have students traveling, I know a little bit less about what Japan is currently requiring. If we use South Korea as a model, I can tell you that there are limits on how many people can group together. I don't think that groups of more than like 5 or 6 are allowed anywhere. Certainly there are hefty fines if you are suspected of being sick but refuse to get tested. Also, if you refuse to wear masks in public places. And all of this is to say that traveling now is very different from what it might have been when, if you've been to Japan in the past, or if you've done other sorts of study abroad programs, traveling during this pandemic is probably going to be very different. So your ability to travel around in Japan might be circumscribed. Your ability to visit some of the tourist spots might be trickier. Just, kind of coming to terms with that, or understanding that this may very well be the case by the time that you get there later in the fall, I think are really important ways to prepare yourself for, travel at this time. In addition, I wanted to talk a little bit about withdrawing and cancellation, just simply because we do still have viability decision dates. And what that means is that Ohio State is going to start compiling a whole bunch of information about each of these partner institutions, as well as kind of the status on Japan in general. So think of it as like a 2-part approval process, where we approve both the country as well as the host institutions, the specific destinations themselves, and I'll talk about what that means in a couple slides here. But we will be working on that over the next couple months, and a decision about autumn 2022 viability will probably come in late May. If it comes around the same time that it did last year, that was late May, early June, when that decision was made about whether or not travel would proceed to Japan. So Up until that time, we're going to avoid any sort of final arrangements, whether that's academic, whether that's housing, whether that's airfare. You know, we're going to try to mitigate the risk here and to keep you as whole as possible so that we are not, you know, out an airfare or something like this. So even if you are admitted by the partner before this viability decision, I'm going to ask you to hold off on purchasing airfare or making housing deposits until we have that sort of a decision, just so that, you know, again, we are not running afoul of it. But while I have this slide up, it is where sort of that distinction that whereas in years past, I might have used the term withdraw or cancel pretty interchangeably in terms of how we talk about discontinuing a program. What I mean by this now is that cancellation is what OSU, what my office will do in, you know, as part of a viability decision, whereas withdraw is something that you, the student, would do. So, you know, if you listen to me talk about, you know, traveling during a pandemic and ultimately decide that this is not for you, that would be a withdraw. At this point, we are on the hook for that flat penalty, the $200 cancellation fee, which can be appealed. So, you know, when you need to withdraw, you just let me know that you are interested in appealing. But that decision needs to be communicated to me via written notification. So you're going to write to me, and then depending on where we are in the process, you would either then also write to the partner, or I would do it on your behalf. It really just hangs on how much interaction you've had with them up until that point. But, you know, which is not to say that I'm hoping anybody withdraws or that we cancel the program, but I did at least want to kind of explain those terms and really to kind of give you the full picture of what that means. I guess the good news with an exchange program is that because there is no program fee per se, and you're not making any payments to Ohio State, or, you know, to some extent even to the host institution, you're really not going to be on the hook for a lot of non-recoverable costs, particularly if you wait, as you're being instructed here, to make some of these larger purchases like airfare or housing or any of these things. So just hold off on that. It's an unfortunate detail that I wanted to make sure that we were super clear on, but also, you know, hopefully that isn't relevant to any of us in the end. It looked as though most of us were busily submitting documents to the online portal there, the globaleducation.osu.edu website where you applied. There are a couple of you that still need to do some things in there, so do make sure that you are submitting documents in a timely fashion. And one of them is going to be that passport scan, and I cannot emphasize this enough. The processing time for new and renewal passports is bananas. We had a student that we were working with who was going to travel this upcoming spring, so in the next couple days or so, who I think applied, you know, in a timely fashion in early September or something like this, and only barely got the passport, even though expedited services were requested, barely got it in time to make it to go on the program. So it can be very, very slow. So if you need a passport, or if you need to renew your passport, either way, it is critically important that you take care of that as soon as possible. So like in the next week or so, if you haven't already. So please make sure that you are taking care of that. Because we'll need to provide a lot of that information in order to start working on some of your visa documents, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Okay, also, and you'll see these in your post-decision action items there in your portal too are some legal waivers. They should look very similar to ones that you've already completed, when you signed up for classes at OSU this year. And it's things that talk about, like, I understand that there is a pandemic happening and that I might get sick, or I understand that I have to follow local regulations and this sort of thing. But then it also talks about these things that cannot be refunded. So like if your class or your program starts off in person, but ultimately has to shift online, much like here at OSU, if that ended up being the case, it is not something that you could be refunded for. So again, these legal waivers for our purposes were made to very closely mirror what the OSU ones say. So they shouldn't be super surprising or unusual, but at the same time, I still wanted to make sure that you knew that those were coming and that that's what you were signing. And then we will talk a little bit about, and this is more of a pre-departure thing, but right now, pretty much everybody has to show PCR testing upon arrival in a foreign country. For a lot of airlines, you have to show them to board a plane. And what this is just telling you is, and in fact, this may actually have been reduced from 72 hours, which is 3 days, to like 48, which is 2. So I'm actually going to have to go check that now that I think about it. But what I wanted to highlight here is that there is a requirement, but then also, if you need to arrive, say, on September 1st in Japan, that means you're leaving on August 31st, which means that you have to back up that test a little bit more so, right? So it's just giving you an idea of what that timing is going to look like. And then similarly, when you come back to the US, you'll have to secure a test in Japan in order to board your flight to come home. In most cases, they are only taking, that PCR test rather than the rapid testing. And that's important because here, what I've included on this next slide are the details that most places require in order to verify that you've gotten a proper, valid PCR test. And before you start to frantically write all this down, don't. I'm going to be making a PDF copy of this whole PowerPoint and attaching it to your online portal so that you have it in your documents section as a reference. And you have probably seen already that there are a number of places where there are links. Those are intended to be helpful to you too. And in fact, let's just go, if I can find which screen I'm on. There we are. Here is where we're going to start keeping an eye on some of those very country specific requirements. So, if we were to click on this one, let's just see if it'll let me do it. Don't judge me for how many tabs I have open. Okay, so you can see that it's a broken link. That's great. So we'll fix that. And we'll go to Japan. And you can see here that it's going to give you the travel advisory, right? And this is entirely due to those COVID considerations. But what's also helpful about these links is that they're going to tell you about specific entry and exit requirements. It's going to tell you about, under normal circumstances, we would refer you to this as a good resource just generally for health and safety, because it has a number of important details that you should be aware of. So yeah, the big one for Japan is prescription medication, which we can talk about in a pre-departure orientation, but just be aware that these sorts of details are available to you on the on this website. So I'll fix that link because it seems to be wonky. Now I see I have questions. No, so the date that I had in there about the arrival date, you've probably already realized that the dates in your itinerary that are there loaded up in your online profile are maybe right. I don't know. They say something about being tentative dates, and they are that way because most of the time our partner institutions will put out, if they put out academic calendars at all, which is kind of a big ask for a lot of our partners. But when they do, what they publish and then what they actually want in terms of arrival instructions for the purposes of moving you into dorms, running you through orientations, getting you registered for classes. These are very different things. So at the end of the day, I don't necessarily know when those dates, when your actual departure date from the US relative to your arrival date in Japan, I don't know what that is. So we will be waiting for admissions information from your partner institution before we book flights, not only because it's a safer thing to do in terms of, investing in a big ticket item like airfare, but also because that will have the most updated instructions on what they want. And so that's another reason why we wait until after you've been admitted and start getting a lot of those details from the partner. So no, that previous slide where it says, if you need to arrive on the 1st, you need to depart on the 31st and then get tested 2 days before that or whatever. That's more for illustration purposes than anything else. So while I'm on this slide though, and here I'll pause to see if anybody has any other questions. I was curious as to where I should go to apply for a visa once they're open again. I'm going to talk about that in a second. So let's just put a pin in that one. And then I will get back to where you need to do it and when you need to do it. I have a whole timeline and everything. So we'll get back to that one. Short answer is Detroit. So it's coming. I promise to tell you. But good, keep these questions coming. Let me circle back here, these risk assessments. So earlier I talked to you about viability decisions, right? And that we are going to start compiling information about not only Japan in general, but each of the partner institutions. And what that means for practical purposes is that we are looking at 3, I guess, avenues of risk, if you will. One is health and safety, right? And, for obvious reasons, the primary thing we're looking at right now is COVID. And when we look at the health and safety, and this is what's on the slide here, we're looking at incidence, which is the number of new cases, prevalence, which is the total number of cases relative to the population, case management. So what is the level of care? How many ICU beds do they actually have available? Because not only do we want to make sure that you would be well taken care of if need be, but also that we were not creating a burden for the local infrastructure as well. And then immigration is that last bullet point there. And that, as its name suggests, is just really basically, will they let Americans in? And right now, the answer is no. But we hope that that will eventually change. But there are 2 other areas of risk that the university really looks at when it determines whether or not a university is viable. And these are as important to the university as the health and safety piece. And one is academic continuity. And that's making sure that, something like the middle of spring 2020 doesn't happen to anybody again, right? Where classes are interrupted and then we don't necessarily know how to make a student whole in terms of credits, right? So one of the things that we find out from our partners is if, we have a surge like we are having right now with Omicron, if something like this were to happen while you were there, are they going to shift to online courses? Are they just going to close the university? Are they going to allow online courses to be synchronous or asynchronous? Are they going to kick people out to go home to complete their classes. We're really trying to make sure that, you know, if we send you, there is a way for you to come out of the experience with the number of credits that you expected to receive, right? That's what academic continuity is. Financial wellness has to do with limiting the amount of financial risk that you take on by applying for one of these programs, right? So again, the good news with an exchange program is that there's very little in the way of program fees or upfront costs. These are costs that you primarily pay out of pocket and in country once your program begins. So in that respect, it's kind of nice that you haven't already paid out for, you know, a whole semester program fee prior to even getting on a plane. In this respect, because, you know, if decisions had to be made, say in June, when that viability decision should be announced, you're not already, you know, $10,000 deep into paying for a program. So those are all the sorts of things that we look at when we determine viability. Do you have questions about any of this? I'm going to mute myself for just a second, but think about that if you have questions. Really, no questions? We're good? Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about finance. Oh, here, one more thing on this slide. I have just general links for State Department and Centers for Disease Control. And then I have the country-specific tabs for Japan at each of these places. Although, as we saw, they don't always work all that well. Thank you. So I will double check those links before I upload this into your online portal, but it should work for you as a resource. And one of the things I am recommending that you do is to plan to look, I don't know, on a weekly basis, just to see if everything is kind of the same in terms of how CDC and Department of State are assessing risk, what sorts of new requirements have been offered, this sort of thing. Okay. All right. So finances. One of the things I wanted to make sure that you knew about was our cost sheets. So let's see if we can find a program here. Would help if I spelled it right, huh? Okay. So on these brochures, you should be able to scroll down and look at the finances. And then, lo and behold, there is a budget sheet or a cost sheet that's available to you. And this is what I wanted to talk about here, is what a budget sheet is and what it is not. It is not gospel truth, written in stone, price tag for your program. It is the worst case scenario that I could come up with. It includes all of the line items I could think of, whether or not they are relevant to you. So for example, you may already have a passport, so that's one line that may not matter to you. You may not end up having to pay for books and supplies because they are perhaps given as part of the program. This is the sort of thing, right? But I have budgeted for everything I can think of. You might even get airfare that's cheaper than this, but I have gone for the high end of a range of possible costs. So that means I've made it as high as possible. And the reason for doing that is simply because I want to make sure that you are, oh my goodness, come on back over here. See, I've distracted myself now. when you use these cost sheets, it is for the purposes of financial aid. What you are going to do if you receive financial aid is you are going to submit a copy of this cost sheet as well as your decision letter, which I will tell you about decision letters here in a moment. You drop these off at student financial aid, and it is intended as a cost of attendance appeal. So what that means is that you are formally requesting that student financial aid replace their price tag for what it costs you to live and study here in Columbus for my price tag, which is what it's going to cost you to live and study in Japan. And as I said, I've made my numbers as high as possible to show that you have greater need. In some cases, this could mean that your loan amount isn't increased. If you're already at your maximum loan amount, you may not get more money out of it, but it may protect the award that you have so that when you apply for other scholarships, you get your regular aid plus the scholarships. So that is what that budget sheet is for, is intended to be a financial aid document. It is not necessarily super helpful to you if you are, if you don't receive any financial aid. You can also use this budget sheet when you apply for scholarships. If the scholarship asks you for a general idea of how much it's going to cost, you can crib from ours. Similarly, if you need to write a step proposal, you can use our budget sheets for that too. Any of these purposes are what that cost sheet is for. You may have noticed, if you have eagle eyes, that that particular one that I was just looking at was updated in 2019. So it's old and needs to be redone, of course. And that's what that second bullet point is that usually these things are done after April 1st. So there is some time between now and then to submit for a financial aid cost of attendance appeal. Go ahead and use what's there for any scholarships or step proposals that you're writing. But like the one that you could use for actual financial aid purposes will be coming in the next couple of weeks. Do you have questions about the cost sheet? Okay. I also wanted to make sure that you knew about additional scholarships, and those deadlines are coming up very, very quickly. The first two are specific to Japan. So make sure that you are East Asia in the top one, but make sure that you are getting your name in the hat for those if you're eligible. Diversity Abroad and Fund for Education Abroad both have a number of different scholarships that they work on. Both are very interested in funding underrepresented students. Underrepresented in study abroad language is students of color, first generation students, non-traditional students, STEM students, GLBTQI students, men. I'm trying to think, did I already say first generation? These are all categories of underrepresented students. So if you are checking one or more of those boxes, do make sure that you are submitting an application for one of those. The Benjamin Gilman Scholarship is for students that receive a Pell Grant or are otherwise Pell eligible. So if you are that, make sure you're applying for it, because they love students that are going for longer programs in non-traditional locations and studying critical languages. And you are doing all three of those things by virtue of doing one of these exchanges. So that's already making you a pretty competitive candidate. If you major in Japanese, then you can, or minor in it, you can apply for one of these College of Arts and Sciences scholarships. They can be pretty generous. And then there are more. There's a fuller list of scholarships that you can look at. They're on our website. But you need to move very quickly, because I think certainly arts and sciences and the OIA ones will come due in like another week or so. So make sure that you're on top of that. Okay. So another source of funding, and I think I talked about this with the students that are impacted by it in interviews, but in the event that I missed anyone, unfortunately, anybody hoping to use post 9/11 GI education benefits for one of our exchanges cannot any longer do so. Department of Defense changed its requirements so that it is not, exchanges are not any longer eligible to be funded that way. So you can get in touch with OSU's Office of Military and Veterans Services for more information. But I did want to make sure that we were all aware of that because it is unfortunately true these days. Okay, so this, now we are finally getting into what I used to talk about as the sole topic in these January meetings, and that is just put on your radar in the back of your mind, the things that you are all going to have to pull together at some point for these applications. If you have never looked at them before or talked to anybody who has done this before, you may not realize that the applications for our partner institutions tend to be pretty involved and require a lot of supporting documents. I don't think that they are necessarily hard, but it's a lot of details. I think the very same skills that you have that make you good students of Japanese will make you just fine here. Because you are pretty used to keeping track of a lot of details and understanding how they all interact with one another. So I'm not super worried about it, but at the same time, it's good that you just have a general idea of what's coming. So the next couple slides are going to talk about documents that all of you will need at some point to provide. It's just a question of, do you provide it as part of the application or do you provide it as part of like, and I've been admitted and now I'm submitting more documents, right? It's different partners will request this information at different times. So rest assured you'll be asked at some point. So the first one is a health form. Many of our partners will request this as part of the application, but not all. Some of them will wait until after you're admitted to request it. And then some of them go the extra step of wanting it to be signed by a medical professional. So I'm putting this out there now because especially right now where it can be difficult to get in to see a doctor, you may want to consider scheduling, because one of the things that is required for some of these applications is a TB test or chest x-ray. They're looking for tuberculosis here. I'm curious to see if COVID is going to factor into these health forms moving forward. And if they're going to want to see any sort of testing or vaccination status as part of that. I don't know. I'm just purely speculating here. But I wouldn't necessarily be surprised because they have always been obsessed with tuberculosis, which is super contagious and also upper respiratory. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is kind of scooped up in that general constellation. So keep an eye on that. We've just received word that Wilts is not currently doing, the Student Health Center is not doing the travel consultation appointments that they used to do for us. So this is another reason why potentially scheduling an appointment with your regular primary care physician might be good, because this person may also be one to consult about any vaccinations that are recommended or required for Japan. That CDC link that I provided earlier will tell you what the CDC recommends. And just a note on the language here, when the CDC recommends something, that is the strongest language they can legally use, because unless it is actually required by that country to enter, they can't say it's required. But just know that when the CDC recommends it, that carries a little bit more punch to it than, a typical recommendation might. So when you do look through the CDC website, most of the time they just want to make sure you're topped off on your regular boosters and that sort of thing. But I'm not that sort of a doctor, so I'm not really going to advise on this. Still, these are all the sorts of things that tend to show up on those health forms. And you'll get a look at those once you have your hands on the partner application. In terms of application documents, you're probably going to want to go back and talk to the folks that wrote your original letters of recommendation, because you will probably require one or more for this application. Some partners like somebody who can speak to your Japanese language abilities, and they say as much. Others are pretty explicit about wanting somebody who doesn't have anything to do with Japan. They want to know about you as a more well-rounded student. The specifics will be laid out in the actual application, but you should at least know that you're going to have to find somebody to write additional letters of recommendation for you. Similarly, go ahead and start ordering up transcripts. They will want it for every institution that you've ever attended. And having said that, I think it's worth explaining that it's maybe not that one class you took at community college before coming to OSU, right? But if you were ever degree seeking at another institution, they're going to want that transcript, right? So not a one-off, but definitely if you were there for a semester or longer. The other thing too, for most of these applications, is that you should expect to write some sort of personal statement or a letter of motivation that outlines what it is you hope to accomplish. That's just good practice anyway, because if you're going to apply for any of those scholarships I mentioned earlier, you're going to need something similar. So I don't think you need to reinvent the wheel for these. I think you can write one and then tweak it for whichever purpose you need it for, but you should be prepared to basically bust out some sort of an essay outlining this. All right, and now here are the two pains. So these are the two big asks, I guess, are the immigration documents. And some of the partners are going to request these two things as part of the application. And some of them are going to request it after you're admitted. Again, the timing just depends, but you are all going to do this at some point. The certificate of eligibility, where's my mouse? There it is kind of a scary looking form if you've never seen it. And here's an example. What you need to remember about the certificate of eligibility is that you are not the applicant. The partner institution is. They are applying for this for you. They just need you to fill in some of the information, right? So that will help explain some of it. This is, as you can see, this is a totally fake one. And it's a sample from, I think, Keio University. But you can at least get a sense of what it's looking for and what it looks like. And here's what that sample entails. It's actually not, so you're not going to put graduated because you won't have been, but you're working on that bachelor, Ohio State University. They'll sometimes even fill in some of these things for you. And then down here, they're going to get into how are you supporting yourself here, which is going to bring me to my next document, which is the certificate of financial support. And this is the one that blows everybody's minds because it is not something that makes a lot of sense. So I have attached to your application the globaleducation.osu.edu portal handout, the certificate of financial support. It's some instructions with some templates that you can borrow when you ultimately do this, because they'll say in the instructions that you can offer up bank balances or bank certificates or these sorts of things, and you can do that if you like. My thought has always been that that's a lot of sensitive information that they don't need, when all they're really doing is just making sure that you have access to, it's usually about $1,500 for every month you're going to be there. So for a 10-month program, $15,000. They want to make sure that you have access to $15,000 for the duration of your time in Japan. Does that mean that you have that in your personal account? No. Does it mean that your parents have it in their checking account? Not even necessarily. It just means that you can make a true statement that you have access to that much money. So it can come from multiple sources, right? So, there's whatever you've saved. You can then look to sponsor funds, and that's usually family, but not always. And then financial aid is another way that you can do this. So maybe you've got $1,000, your parents have $2,000, and then you have, 12,000 coming to you in loans for the full academic year, right? This is how you can cobble together the total amount from multiple sources. It's just that everything needs to match. So whatever you end up putting in your certificate of eligibility needs to match what you are showing as a certificate of financial support. But right now, since you are theoretically sitting at some device that will give you the internet, I want you to log into your portal right now and take a look at that certificate of financial support that I've attached there, and just take a look at it and let me know what questions you have. I will hang on for just a second. I'm assuming you guys are all looking at the same thing now. So here's what I've attached. Here is more or less what I've just explained. They don't need all that extra and sensitive information. Like, they don't need it. They just want to make sure that you don't have to find a job and that you're not going to end up living on a park bench while you're there, right? That's all they're up to. So you can come up with something. These are all actual letters that past students have come up with, obviously with the information redacted, but you see that it includes all of these details. But here we are. This letter is to confirm that Susie Q has $1 billion on deposit in our institution. If you have any questions or concerns, please contact me. Blah, blah, blah. The end. And if that's the full amount, you only need one letter. Or you say, as of today, the sponsor, which is usually family, but not always, has the equivalent of however much money, yen or USD, that the student has access to while studying overseas in Japan. And then the dates. Beautiful. There's another one in here. Yes. It has the student's money and then parent money. And then two different sources are covered in the same letter. Perfect. And then here's a financial aid one. There's enough turnover in financial aid that they don't always immediately understand what you're asking them for, but it's fine. If you need help approaching them, just let me know. It's usually going to come as an estimate because it's too early. You haven't been packaged for next year yet, but they will say, okay, here's what you're going to get for students should be eligible to continue receiving some scholarship, but then you should also get this loan for this amount. So it adds it up, or you have 3 different letters that add up to 15,000. We're in great shape. doesn't matter that this is all going to go towards your tuition. They don't care about that either. They just want to make sure that you have that money, right? Seriously, no questions? This is making total sense. Really and truly? All right, man. Okay. So almost done. All right. Here's Carl's question about applying for the visa. This cannot happen until July or August. And the reason for that is because certificates of eligibility are not issued usually. If they're going to be issued at all, which is, of course, the first hurdle we have to cross. If it's going to be issued, it won't be until after you've been admitted into the program and after they have managed to get these back from whichever ministry in Japan they come from, right? So they usually come in July and August. It will require an in-person appearance at the consulate in Detroit if you're an Ohio resident. If you are not an Ohio resident, we'll look to see which consulate has jurisdiction over where you live. But you can also just use your Columbus address for the purposes of just keeping it tidy and in line with what everyone else is doing. You will need to have that actual certificate of eligibility in hand as well as your physical passport because they will put the visa directly into it. So that's what we need to do in our general sense of when we're going to apply for the visa. And then the general timeline here. And if there's a hyperlink, it means that you can find the application materials on their website. So you can follow those links for those 3 institutions. Otherwise, I need to actually get them or get Dropbox materials from the other 3. But you see that we have kind of a broad range of application deadlines. Those acceptance notifications will start trickling in early April, seems wrong, probably late April for Hokkaido now that I'm looking at that. May and June is usually when they start getting back to us about whether or not students have been admitted. So that should dovetail pretty nicely with our viability decision. So the asterisk for Rikyo right there has to do with the fact that I'm guessing, I think it's March 31st, but they haven't updated it yet for this year. I'm not anticipating it being too different from that. And then for Tenri, that double asterisk, it is so late that I'm probably going to ask my Tenri student to submit that document, the application materials, probably at the beginning of April, just simply so that we can get it done and taken care of before the end of our semester, because that's getting a little too close to finals and to the end of our semester to be super comfortable. So we'll probably send that application in sooner and we can talk about that together at some point. So these are the primary things that I wanted to talk to you about. And at that point, I think I will stop sharing now. But I would like to know what questions you have, because surely there are some. Really? Truly? Okay. Well, in the absence of any questions, I will turn you loose on this very cold Friday. I do anticipate some questions trickling in afterwards, but do let me know. The other thing that I thought I should probably tell you at some point is, and you may have gotten auto replies from me that kind of gave you a hint that this was coming, but my role at OIA has changed over the last couple months. So I am moving out of global education to work more on the partnerships piece. So the contracts that allow you to travel on these exchanges. And the global education office is in the process of hiring my replacement. So there is going to come a point where you are working more directly with someone else than with me, but I will be kind of hanging out here in the background to help you. Um, so that is a good question there that Asha has asked about applying for the partner institutions yourselves, or do you do it for us? So you actually are going to submit the applications, and we can establish meetings if this would be helpful to you to go over the application and to set up deadlines. So many of these partners have moved entirely online with their process that there's nothing for me to ship anymore. For my ICU students, I will need to nominate you first before they will give you the links to the online application. But especially if you are one of those students with the hyperlink where their materials are located online, you can actually start looking at those application materials sooner rather than later. Otherwise, I will be sending out kind of additional messaging telling you when things need to be submitted, but we do have those deadlines now. And in many cases, we have the actual application materials. So there is nothing really to stop you from getting started and looking over those materials to make sure that you can, kind of get out ahead of them before the semester gets too busy. Good. Any other questions? The links are in that last slide. Let's see. Let's back up here. So if we back up, so Hokkaido, Nanzan, and Waseda, this will take you to the pages with those. Sorry, I'll move over here with this mouse. These three will take you straight to where it is located. ICU, as I mentioned, so here's step, and they're going to have their list of stuff. Let's see if we can get Nanzan. Okay, so we're gonna see, we've got all sorts of fun stuff here. And then let's look at Waseda. Waseda. If we scroll down here, it's going to give you application schedule as well as the list of documents that you need to provide and it will give you the actual how to submit. So that's more or less what I'm on about in terms of the ones that are level as ready for you to look at. Man, it's not what I meant to do. All right, International Christian, as I said, I need to nominate you guys first, which I'll be taking care of in the next couple weeks. And then Rikyo said early February they would send out their stuff, and then Tenri is so late. I think they just send everything on paper, so I will be forwarding that along. But I think everybody then has their materials that way. Did I miss anyone? No. Okay. Yes. So when they send materials to me, I will forward it to you. Yes.